Today I'm going to go over the pros and cons of ND filters and why I spent $250 on this filter when I have these filters and they're so much cheaper. Now this video isn't sponsored by anybody in any way. I bought all of these filters with my own money, so I'm going to tell you my experience with using ND filters out in the field. Now if you're familiar with shooting video, then you know that generally you want your shutter speed to be twice your frame rate. You also probably want a pretty open aperture, and I usually film around f4 to f5.6 depending on the shot, and sometimes even lower for those detail shots. Now the problem is when you combine those two things together, then you're probably letting in a lot of light when you're outside shooting in the daytime. But if you crank up your shutter speed like you would do in photography, then the footage becomes very jittery looking. And if you crank up your aperture, then you lose your shallow depth of field that you would get with lower aperture. So you really don't want to do either of those things. On top of that, when you're shooting in a log profile like S-Log, your base ISO is already at 800. So you have an ISO of 800, a shutter speed of probably 1/50th of a second, and an open aperture like f4, then you're going to be letting in a ton of light during the daytime, and your footage is probably going to be overexposed probably 100% of the time. Now to fix this, we use ND filters, because if you don't want to change the settings, then you have to change the amount of light going in. And since you can't really turn down the sun, you use an ND filter to filter out some of that sunlight. So with that being said, when I am filming, I pretty much have an ND filter on my camera all the time, which is 100% of the time when I'm outside filming, there's an ND filter on my camera. Now let's go over the pros and cons to using a ND filter on a regular basis. This right here is an ND filter, and it cuts down light at about 3 stops. So if I hold this in front of the camera, you see where the filter is darker. Now the problem is with this kind of filter is, what if I need 2 stops? Or what if I need 5 stops? I would have to take off this filter and get another filter that's 2 stops, or 1 stop, or 5 stops, or however many stops you need. Screw that one on and put this one away. You can already see the problem in this. I would have to carry around a ton of these things, and I would have to be changing these consistently throughout the day, because every time the sun goes behind the clouds, I would have to change the ND filter. Every time I step into a shaded area, so it becomes a real hassle to switch these ND filters off and on throughout your whole shoot. Now that's where filters like variable ND filters come in, and what they can do is they rotate and they get darker as you rotate them. So as you can see, it's very dark now, and if I rotate it the other way, it gets brighter. So you can precisely dial in the amount of light that you want to cut down on with just one filter. Now that pretty much sounds like it fixes the problem, right? Because you have one filter that can do everything multiple ND filters can do. So what's the problem? Well, for one thing, a regular ND filter is just a darkened piece of glass. But a variable ND filter obviously can't be a darkened piece of glass, because you wouldn't be able to brighten it. So what it actually is 2 polarizer filters side by side that cancel each other out as they rotate past each other. So if you've ever used a circular polarizer, then you know that polarizers cut down on reflections and can help bring more vibrancy to your image and a lot of other things when it comes to seeing through glass and water reflections and things like that. So an ND filter, you don't want your ND filter doing what the polarizer filter does, because that's an unwanted effect. If you want to have a polarization effect, you want to use a polarizer. If you just want ND, then you want your ND filter to only cut down light. You don't want it doing more than one thing, because you can't control them separately. So a lot of times when you're using a variable ND filter, you have some kind of polarizing effect going on, and it's not really pleasing all the time either, because sometimes it's in certain splotches of the image. This side of the image might be more colorful and more vibrant than this side. It just depends on the angle that you're at and how dark you have the filter turned. One of the biggest problems with variable ND filters is that once you get to a certain point, the polarizers cross each other, and you can actually see the pattern that it leaves into your footage, and it completely destroys any of the footage that you're filming once you get to that point. I've had this actually happen to me a couple of times on shoots when I've turned it too far and didn't realize it on the monitor, but when I got back to look at the footage, there's a big giant X going through the footage, and I can't use it. So those are the common problems that you pretty much find with just about any variable ND filter out there on the market. So let's get down into the more specifics that separate the brands from each other. A regular ND filter is really not that advanced. It's just a piece of glass that's been darkened. So there's not really a lot of technology going into making one of these filters. So with that being said, they're usually more high quality, and they're usually cheaper, because like I said, there's nothing really going on that's too complicated. It's just a darkened piece of glass, like sunglasses. Some of the cheaper ones will leave a color cast on your image, so instead of letting through the light cleanly and unaltered, it'll have like maybe a purplish cast to the image, or maybe a bluish or greenish cast. And it's kind of a pain to work out in editing, but it's not always that big of a deal. And this is a really, really cheap filter. But like I said earlier, you don't want to be changing these things out all day. So as nice as regular ND filters are, it's not something that I would use on a daily basis because it's just too much of a hassle to carry around all the different strength levels and having to switch them out every time I need something in a different lighting condition. So let's move on to the variable ND filters. Now as you can see, I have a couple of these variable ND filters and I've had many over the years, and no matter how much I pay or how much I don't pay, they all pretty much have the same general problems. For example, this filter has dots on it that show you the level of ND that you're adding. But the problem is the dots are not accurate to what you're actually adding. You would think that one dot would be one level, the next dot would be another level, and it would go up evenly, but that's not the case. From here to here might be a little bit of ND, but from here to here might be a lot of ND. So it doesn't really go up in an even amount. So you can't really use the dots for accurate measurement. This particular filter is made by K&F, and it doesn't have any markings at all. You just pretty much blind. You don't know where you at. It doesn't even have a beginning or end point. So you just, the filter just rotates. Like you don't even know where you're starting at. So you kind of just have to look at it and say, okay, I think this is the brightest it gets, and maybe somewhere in here is the darkest it gets. So that's obviously not something that you want to use. Now, another problem is, even though that filters like this one has it marked where it's the minimum and maximum, usually the maximum setting is not even usable. The maximum setting might tell you when the filter is at its darkest, but remember I talked about the cross pattern that these filters have. At the max setting, this filter is completely in the middle of its cross pattern, so I don't even want to use this filter at its maximum. So I have to be very paranoid about where I have the filter dialed in, because even if I'm in the range that it says it works in, it might be ruining my image. A good example of that is when I was using this filter. It is made by PolarPro, and I actually marked on the filter where my acceptable point was, where I knew that I can't go past the actual marking that I marked. Because like I said earlier, this filter still has 3 dots beyond my level of acceptability on this filter. So if I was out in the field and I said, okay, I'm not going to put it on max, but let me put it maybe 2 stops before max, it still would be ruined. So I really had to go through the filters and mark down where to stop on which particular filter. Now, even with all those issues and problems that I talked about, an ND filter is still a very crucial part to making your footage look like you want it to look. So you kind of just have to deal with it and learn to work around all the shortcomings with the filters. Now that brings us to why I painfully paid $250 for this filter, even though I already have tons of others. With this PolarPro filter, literally every issue I just talked about is solved. This filter doesn't have a color cast that it leaves on your image. It has hard stops on the filter, so you'll never go beyond the range that it works in. It clearly has it labeled on the filter exactly how much light you're cutting down. So 2 is 2 stops, 3 is 3 stops, all the way up to 5, which is 5 stops of light. So you know exactly what you're cutting down on with the filter, instead of having a bunch of little dots that mean nothing. The glass is made of natural quartz, so it retains the quality of the light that's passing through it really well, so you don't really degrade anything on quality of your image as far as sharpness or color accuracy. And it has multiple coatings on it that help with flaring and scratching, dust, dirt, water repellent, all that good stuff. So you're good to use it out in the field without having to worry about water sticking to it, dust getting on it. You can just blow it off and it doesn't really stick to the filter. A lot of times when you put a filter on your lens, the lens cap doesn't really fit anymore. So instead of ruining your nice filter that you just paid $250 for, it comes with a nice lens cap cover that goes on really easy, really quickly, and it's hard, and it protects the filter and the lens from bumps and drops and things like that. So I don't really have to worry about, knocking my lens around, messing up my filter or the front of my lens. So as painful as it was to spend $250 on this filter, I could have avoided buying all of these filters if I would have just had this filter in the first place. I think the main reason why people were very skeptical about this product when it first came out and they saw the price tag is they thought that because Peter Mckinnon is on this product, that's probably why it costs $250 instead of costing something like $50 for one of these filters. There are many other high-end filters that do cost even more than this $250 filter and still don't have the thought and effort that is put into this filter. So while it might be high compared to some of the cheaper filters out there, it's not really high when you compare it against other high quality filters. You can check out a video that was done by Gerald Undone, who compared many of the well-known brands of ND filters against each other, including this one, so you can see a direct side-by-side comparison of how the image looks when using those filters. Now, don't go out there and spend $250 on an ND filter if there are other things that you need to get first. You could put that money towards new lenses, new lighting equipment, PC upgrades, and a lot of other things that come before spending a lot of money on something like an ND filter. You can use one of the cheaper ND filters, just be aware of the limitations that it has. So make sure that you're prioritizing your money first before you go and drop $250 on an ND filter just because I'm telling you how perfect it is. For me, buying that filter was an efficiency upgrade. Now I don't have to worry about any of those problems that I just talked about while I'm shooting, and I can focus more on the actual shoot and spend less time worrying about how my ND filter is set and what it's doing to my footage. But if you're somebody who's looking to get a filter like this and just on the fence about if you should get it or not, then I'm definitely here to tell you that yes, go ahead and get it because it works exactly as described and it's just about perfect. It's not a fun purchase like lenses and cameras and things like that, but it makes a huge difference when it comes down to shooting. So I hope this video was helpful. As always, leave all questions and comments down below. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, follow me on Instagram, and I will see you guys in the next video.